Thank you for joining me, everyone. For those who don't know me yet, I am Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 24 years, and I was introduced to the practice during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression, panic disorder, agoraphobia. My life had basically stopped. And the tools and techniques that I've learned in these practices were the foundation of a ladder that I used to climb my way out of the abyss. And I'm really honored and thrilled to be part of a large circle of people over time and space that not only engage in this practice, but teach this practice, share this practice, so that we're all helping each other out. Because if there's one thing I've found, even though all of our experiences are wildly different, the way we experience our experiences, there's a lot of commonality there. We're all feeling stuff, right? One of the challenges we run into sometimes with this practice is we have a beginner's mindset when we start. This sort of, what the hell am I doing? Right? And some of that tends to fall away as we get a little more accustomed, get a little more used to the practice, build our skills a little bit. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's part of the idea, right? But there are some advantages to that beginner mindset. Some of the progress we have in the beginning, you could say all of the progress we have in the beginning, is built upon the beginner's mindset. So when some of those beginner's mindset characteristics start to fall away, we do lose something. We do lose something. So it's good to check in now and then and exercise some of those beginner's mind aspects so that we don't lose what is helpful about them. And that's what leads me to today's practice. So let's jump in. Okay. I like to begin my practices by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head. It's a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And if you're feeling any tension, that's fine. Absolutely fine. No need to try to force it away, which is just adding tension to tension. In my experience, it just makes it worse. So if we're feeling something that is tight, tense, unpleasant, it's allowed to be here. It's allowed to be here. It's also allowed to leave in its own time, which may or may not be today. I also like to notice what is in contact with the chair, or the cushion, the floor. So there's a sense of grounding, of being supported by something. Something is holding us up. And we can let it do so. Let's take a moment to notice that grounding or support beneath us and this gentle lift at the top. And whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And right here, we can start to cultivate some beginner's mind. Very often, when we bring our attention to our breathing, particularly when we're doing so deliberately as part of a meditation, we begin to shape or control our breathing in a way that we think it's supposed to be. Oh, I'm meditating. I have to have a long, deep, contemplative breath, right? Not here. Our meditative breath is simply the breath that is happening as we are meditating. As a monk whose work that I read and study quite a bit once said, this practice is about asking the right questions, not about knowing the answers in advance. Trying to force the breathing to be a certain way is making a decision about how this experience is supposed to be, and then trying to force our actual experience to match that. And when we decide how our experience must be, and try to force it into that little box, we lose that beginner's mind aspect. That's asking the question, well, how is this experience? What is this experience if I'm not trying to force it into this little box? What is the breathing like if I'm not trying to make it be the way I think it needs to be? What if I'm asking questions instead of trying to force? This experience to match the answers I've brought with me. Sometimes we may see somebody who's very skilled at something, like playing a musical instrument. Think of a professional piano player sitting down, playing a concert in front of a lot of people. Not making any mistakes. But then imagine a child going up to a piano for the first time and just mashing down on the keys. And look at their faces. Who's more open? Who's more intrigued? Who's more joyful? Not that there's anything wrong with being skilled, and not that the professional piano player may not be experiencing joy. But that openness, that's a quality that we want to cultivate. We want to make sure we don't lose. Curiosity is very powerful in this practice, because it necessarily implies an acknowledgement that we don't know everything. And that's necessary for us to be receptive to taking in new information. In this case, information about ourselves, about what's coming up for us, about what we're doing with what comes up for us, about how that's working out for us. And we can do that just with the breathing. How the breathing is arising, how the breathing is passing, how the breathing feels, what we do with the breathing as a result of how it feels. Can we be curious about the breathing and what it does if we don't interfere with it? Sometimes when we are simply observing the breathing, a storyline pulls us away. We end up off in a daydream. When we notice that that has happened, we have lost the breathing for a bit. We simply notice that as something that has happened. We simply notice that that is part of this process. It's part of the process of having a mind. As we lose our beginner's mind, we may start to get frustrated with that. Oh, my mind, it needs to stop thinking when I sit and meditate. It's not supposed to happen this way. Again, there's trying to force our practice into this box we think it's supposed to fit in. And in this case, trying to fit it into an impossible box. Because minds think. And this idea of, I need to stop thinking, well, that is a thought in itself, so it's already too late. But that beginner's mind, that curiosity with that openness says, oh, look what happens. And then we try again. And over time, because of that openness, because of asking the questions, perhaps we start to notice some of the patterns of how and when we're more likely to lose the breathing. Now we're taking in new information. Because of that curiosity, we're receptive to it. Rather than trying to force things to be a certain way, which, like I said at the beginning of the sitting, is like trying to force tension away, adding tension to tension. But force always meets counterforce. Beginner's mind isn't about force. Beginner's mind is much more powerful. Instead of trying to force things into a box, it's making space for things to unfold naturally. And because of our receptivity, from our curiosity and our openness, we can see more clearly what that unfolding is like. And based on that information, we can make more skillful decisions on what to do next. How to think, how to speak, how to act. This is why I often say that this practice of mindfulness, insight meditation, will give you everything if you ask nothing of it. The skill is in learning how to ask the right questions. In time, all of the answers will present themselves. Thank you, everyone. I'll be hanging on for a few minutes. If anyone wants to share anything in the chat, any questions or observations. Michelle, the circumstances may be different. This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about how we have different experiences, but we experience those experiences in similar ways. And this is why we can feel each other's pain or anger, can rub off on each other. Yeah, there's certainly an energy, a charged energy to emotion. As I often say, it's not just about what's coming up, but it's about what we're bringing to what's coming up. We're not passive recipients of our experience. So if somebody around us is experiencing something that is creating a charged emotional state, we have the potentials. I'm getting a little bit into Buddhist karma speak now. But we have these potentials within us for our experience that we have a hand, a big hand, in how those express themselves. Because, again, of how we work with them when they come up and how we've worked with them when they have come up in the past. So I was giving a talk, I think it was earlier this week, about how sometimes if we start to feel like something is out of control, we start to think about how a bunch of other things are also out of control. And some other things that we thought were under control, we might start to feel not so sure about anymore. It kind of spreads. And these emotional states are kind of the same way. If you start to become angry about one thing, then we start thinking about everything that's ever made us angry before, right? And that can come from the outside as well. If somebody is angry and says something rude to us, our reception of that doesn't happen in a vacuum. We hear that, and every injustice that we feel has ever happened to us starts to come up in our mind, right? And it all just comes spilling out, this huge backlog. Which is why one person could experience somebody's anger being directed towards them and completely explode. And another person could experience that same anger being directed towards them, not really be fazed. Because it's not about the anger that's being presented to us. It's about how we perceive it, interpret it, react and respond to it. Let's see what else we've got here, because I think we had quite a few things. I like to get to as much as I can. Farnaz, that's exactly it. Our experiences are different, but when I read others' comments, I see myself in others. And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I was talking about this with a client just a couple of days ago. We are all experiencing some kind of pain, and we are all experiencing some kind of suffering. That's a commonality. So, in the example I was just giving of somebody who's angry coming up and being rude to us, and perhaps we don't have a very skillful response to that because it starts awakening all of these past experiences for us. In that case, both parties are experiencing some kind of pain and some kind of suffering. That's not to say that the person who's presenting the anger in the first place is being skillful. It's not a way of excusing rude behavior. It's merely saying we can recognize that we do have something in common with that person, and in fact have something in common with every person. What causes us pain is not the same for everyone. But pain as a thing is a universal experience. It's not the same experience for all of us, but we all feel pain. And we all, at some point, to varying degrees, experience suffering when we do not handle our pain skillfully. And of course, that's what we're here to work with, is learning how to handle pain, discomfort, unfamiliarity, learning how to handle these things more skillfully so that we're not suffering. All of our suffering comes from a place of trying to not feel pain. And does that work? Well, no, that's why we suffer, because we're going to feel pain. It's part of the human experience. It's a necessary part of the human experience. Imagine if we didn't feel pain. How long would we survive? I mean, humans wouldn't survive. How could we possibly if we didn't experience pain? Pain is a signal to keep us safe. But sometimes it's not in line with the reality of the situation. Sometimes it's a signal trying to keep us safe in a situation that isn't unsafe. But we act like it is. And that's not any more helpful than being in a situation that is unsafe and acting like it isn't. These are the things that we want to see clearly so that we respond skillfully and in accordance with each situation on its own merits. Farnaz, I can't close my eyes, makes me anxious. No worries. This is not a militant practice. You don't have to sit this way. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do this thing. And if closing your eyes is a problem, you may keep your eyes slightly open with your gaze averted downward. You may practice with your eyes open. We're engaging in a process of watching what is arising and passing, what's coming up, what we're doing with it. That does not require eyes to be closed. I prefer eyes closed most of the time, simply because it helps. I'm very visually oriented. So things in my line of sight can be distracting very easily. One of the tricks that I use sometimes to concentrate on the breathing without getting pulled away by the mind is to actually focus my eyes even while they're closed. Because I found, again, I'm very visual, so I get all these images and then storylines come up based on the images and off I go. I find that I cannot visualize, I can't have this mental imagery happening at the same time that my eyes are actually focused, even if my eyes are closed. So if I focus them on the blackness of the inside of my eyelids, I can't hold that and a mental image at the same time. So it's very helpful for me to keep from getting pulled away by daydreams and so forth. Experiment for yourself. This is your practice. And again, beginner's mind, openness, curiosity, inquiry, experimentation. Try things out, see what works, and adjust as necessary, because what works today may not be what works tomorrow. So, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Ren says, I struggle to sit in silence. Hey, Ren, good to see you again. Struggle to sit in silence. That is not unusual for us, is it? I don't know that that was ever unusual for us, but as people, as humans. But I think it's even harder today with all of the stimulation that we get. And not just the stimulation that we get, the stimulation that we seek. Right? Picking up the cell phone, flipping through the social media. I mean, that's there, but it's not coming to us. We're going to it. I do silent sittings. I don't sit with, background music or so forth. That doesn't mean you can't. It's not something that I necessarily recommend for insight meditation, vipassana, where we're really watching to see what is coming up on its own without outside interference or stimulation, so to speak. But again, this is your practice. So you may try to find some different ways to work that. You might try sitting in silence for just a minute and slowly increasing. You may want to practice with some kind of background ambient noise. What we want to do is work with discomfort in a skillful but sustainable way, meaning if we have something that we find challenging and uncomfortable, there's a lot of value, especially in my experience. I have found this over and over again. I've based my entire practice on this. There's a huge amount of value on working with what makes us uncomfortable, such that our comfort zone is expanding rather than shrinking. And some of those things that at one point were very uncomfortable sometimes actually start to become pleasant. I've told some stories in the past on here about some of those experiences for myself. But if it's overwhelming, if it's becoming dysfunctional, then we find other ways to work with it. Again, experimentation. Brush up against that comfort zone. Try to expand a little bit. But don't, as my own teacher is fond of saying, don't make yourself sick getting healthy. Okay? Purple Stem, how are we doing? Would love to hear more about the anger and responding to this. Please consider a whole talk on this topic. Funny you should mention. I have a couple of sessions out on my YouTube channel about anger. So you're welcome to drop me a line if you'd like more information about that, or you can search for it or so forth. I have a funny history with anger. As I mentioned at the beginning, I came to this practice because of anxiety and depression, panic disorder, a whole bunch of things. I also, for a very long time, had not a huge, but definitely a significant anger management issue. And one of the funny things that I found over the course of the years of this practice is, without even really trying, my anger management issues really subsided. Because all of the skills that I was learning for working with anxiety and depression and panic were these skills of really being with what was here and seeing it very clearly, without getting carried away by my storylines about it. And of course, the storylines, once they begin, they simply perpetuate the process. Because we get a storyline going, and then based on that storyline, our body starts to respond, because it doesn't know it's a storyline. It doesn't know the difference between what's, if we're having an imagined experience about something or that experience is actually happening to us. Our subconscious mind and body don't know the difference. It's going to respond the same either way. So we start up some storyline about something that's happened to us, like I was saying at the beginning, somebody being rude to us. And we start to spin storylines about that, and our body gets into fight or flight mode and is like, okay, we're doing this. And the fact that our body has started to do that kind of confirms for the mind that there really is a situation here, and we're off to the races. Well, that was a vicious cycle that I learned to unravel, to see through, as I worked with anxiety and panic and depression. But those skills weren't limited to just those experiences. They're transferable. Like I often say, if you're a swimmer, if you do swimming for a long time, then you want to take up jogging. You don't have to build up stamina from square one for the jogging. You have it from the swimming. It transfers. This is the same thing I found with anger and a bunch of other uncomfortable emotional states. The fact that I had learned how to make space for something uncomfortable like anxiety, like panic, meant that when something else uncomfortable like anger arose, those same skills, they just kicked in automatically. And it wasn't until one day I just realized, wow, a whole bunch of things have happened today that really would have set me off at one point, and I'm fine. And no one was more surprised than me. So, yeah, I've had an interesting history with anger in this practice where it's been a huge, huge help, but not because I tried to make it so. But yeah, feel free to check out those sessions out on YouTube or drop me a line if you need any help finding them. Yeah, observing it. Yeah, purple stomach. Yeah, observing and sitting with the discomfort. That's really it. That's really it. Again, it's our fight or flight mode. We're not real good at sitting with discomfort because evolutionarily, discomfort could mean death. Saber-toothed tiger or what have you, right? And our subconscious minds and bodies haven't caught up to the fact that we live in a world where there are lots of opportunities to experience discomfort that aren't a mortal danger, that aren't actually unsafe, that aren't actually a threat. So our subconscious minds and bodies still react as if they are, which makes it really difficult to sit with them. And that's why we practice doing exactly that, so that we build the skill of seeing, not just seeing intellectually, but at a felt level. Oh, wait a minute. This is uncomfortable. This sucks. All right? This sucks. But I'm not in danger. And I don't have to react and respond as if I am. Because that will make things unnecessarily worse. This is that clear seeing I'm talking about. Yeah, Francine, what works today may not work tomorrow. Yep, that's sure been my experience. The ongoing experimentation, which is a form of beginner's mind. That's why it's really important that we continue to cultivate our curiosity and our openness. Hard to sit in silence with the traffic noise, but try to focus on the birdsong over it. I would suggest sitting with the hardness of the traffic noise. See what happens. We're here to learn how to live better. And life is noisy. Which is why we need the practice. So yeah, the birds are nice. Traffic can be instructive as well. Yeah, there's a conversation between Michelle and Francine about there was one way to do this. One of the things that you hear sometimes in this kind of a practice is people say, oh, meditation, there's no wrong way to do it. Wouldn't say that. First off, there are many different kinds of meditation, and what I practice and teach and study comes from Theravada Buddhism, which is solely concerned with how do we live with less suffering. And the Buddha detailed a whole bunch of practices about what worked for him and said, hey, try this. And there are wrong ways of doing it. There are. There are ways that are not skillful. But there is no one way that is. There are so many different avenues and techniques and different ways and areas for focusing attention that can all bring us to the same place. And that's, again, why beginner's mind, openness, curiosity, experimentation. The Buddha himself views very pragmatic, very scientific. It's about experimentation. The whole thing about karma is cause and effect. We change causes and conditions, and we see the effects. How else are we going to learn? It's hard to sit with anxiety. Yeah, Farnaz, I'm right there with you. Yeah. And that's learning how to sit with anxiety was my whole early practice. It is still something I do today. I mean, it's not like I don't experience anxiety today. And that's something that we could talk more of offline if you wanted to, because obviously it's such a huge topic. But the last thing I'll say is, along with experimentation, consistency is key. It's like any other skill. I talked about that professional piano player who was doing a concert in front of people and not making any mistakes and so forth. And that player did not get to that point by sitting down and practicing once a week. I'm still the same guy who 24 years ago was stuck at home, housebound, with agoraphobia stemming from panic disorder and anxiety. There's nothing special about me. I simply practiced every day. And still practice every day, on and off the cushion. And this is just where I am in my journey now. But that consistency, persistence, what the Buddha called ardency. Sometimes it's a 3 steps forward, 2 steps back experience. So we want to make sure we're getting those 3 steps forward in. I think I'll leave it there. This has been really great. Cheers, everyone. I appreciate everyone being here today. Again, I'm Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. Thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.